Lucky Paper and Tommy Boy present Cube Jams.
It's power creep.
The hottest pod-pumping Cube Jams of all time.
They drafted Midnight Cube going anywhere.
Cube Jams.
I saw a werewolf come into play just last turn.
Get ready for Cube Jams.
There he was summoning sick.
God, it's so unjust.
Pump up the volume.
When
Cube Jams.
attack with my goblin guide, I cry when your deck was stacked with the scry.
Ridiculously fun songs that are guaranteed to get your drafters on their feet.
Look at these cards, aren't they neat? Wouldn't you think my collection's complete?
Cube
Wouldn't you
Jams.
think there is a brand new one drop that will always have a slot. Upgraded Elite Vanguard with bows to oh my so hot.
Get Cube Jams or get lost.
When it enters the battlefield, it draws a card.
Available now at record stores everywhere.
525,600 new cards.
It's a good album. And strange. On that bombshell, welcome to this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. My name is Andy, and I'm here, as always, with my co-host, here with a brand new banned and restricted announcement for the aux cable at Cube Night. It's Anthony Maddox.
Oh, yeah. What did we ban?
Linkin Park?
Linkin Park. There were a couple other bannings, I remember, but they weren't respected, so here we are.
You seemed genuinely upset that your ban of Linkin Park was not respected.
It wasn't my favorite thing.
You were like a couple drinks in, and you were just like, "It's one thing I ban." Like under your breath, you were like, "I only ask one thing, and it's that you don't play Linkin Park on my speaker." And here it is, it's happening.
I like a lot of music. I do. I love a lot of music, but I don't love Linkin Park. I think it's not good music, but I recognize that it is like an integral part of a lot of people's development as whatever kind of people they are.
As douchebags. I can see why you don't like it.
Is it because the quality is bad and it doesn't sound good?
It's really not, is the thing. So
Okay.
I think, like, objectively, Linkin Park is not that bad in the pantheon of bad bands that people have affection for because they came along at a time in their life where they have some nostalgia for them. I think they're fine.
Okay, fine.
You could do so much worse in that era than Linkin Park. They were at least inventive. They had a unique sound. Hybrid Theory is still one of the greatest albums of all time, just saying. We're not alone, Anthony. We are joined today by Parker, too young for Jock Jam's LaMascus.
Indeed. I did catch the last of, what was that compilation album? Greatest?
Which one?
You know,
We were talking about it a lot last night. We were talking about, that's what I call music, Jock Jams, Buzz Ballads.
I don't think Kids Bop came up, but that feels like it's in the same spot.
Oh, I hadn't thought about Kids Bop in so long. What a weird thing they did. Just have children cover songs.
Was weird.
And they would have them cover songs with, like, very questionable subject matter, too.
Huh.
Yeah.
I caught
Weird.
the tail end of those, and then very quickly people started streaming music. So
Oh, yeah, I guess that would be the difference maker, huh?
Yeah.
Right, like we had now, that's what I call music, because there was no other way to listen to different kinds of songs. That was the only thing. That was the only thing we had access to.
cassettes, CDs.
I was a Buzz Ballads man personally, though. There was definitely a part of my childhood where Jock Jams was like the coolest thing you could have as a child. It was like when you were so young that you didn't really have any kind of taste in music yet, and then Jock Jams.
And about that time you started listening to Linkin Park?
No, this is well before Linkin Park. Linkin Park is when you develop your taste and you become the beautiful appreciator of all different kinds of culture you are today. Anyway, Jock Jams comes along and it's just like, hey, here's a CD full of cool songs for cool kids. And you're like, great, I like that apparently.
Easy. Just be cool in one easy step by Jock Jams.
It is very weird to me that all those songs feel so much like sports songs to me. And I don't know if it's because of Jock Jams or it's because of whatever Jock Jams was tapping into that made those songs sportsy songs in the culture, because they're all very different styles. It's like there's a Queen song and there's like Pump Up the Jam and stuff. Like the Pump Up the Jam, it feels like a sports song, doesn't it?
I think it's because sports were co-opting music. Like the only reason I know
for sure.
Yeah, like Wolf Mother, you know this song? Joker and the Thief.
I recognize the name.
Anyways, it was at football games when I was in high school. The only reason I know it.
Yeah.
And it's because the sports were trying to be cool.
Sports are always trying to be cool.
They tried so hard to be cool,
and
but
failing.
but they weren't.
failed. The nerds
the cool
are the real
kids
cool.
They're
are
not as
here
cool as us Magic
in the basement
players.
shuffling Magic the Gathering cards.
Parker, your real nickname this week should have been just like Savior of Lucky Paper Radio, because I realized last week on like Thursday that I had my impending vacation off in my head by a week, and I leave in like 3 days for vacation. I need to have an episode out before then. And I was talking to Anthony about this like 2 days ago, and he's like, when are we going to record? I'm like, I don't know. And you're like, hey, can we record an episode while I'm in town this weekend? And yeah, absolutely we can. You're here in the studio, in
the
meat
flesh.
space.
No more necessary UPin Zoom accounts to make this happen.
Yeah. So you're bringing the topic. You're basically hosting this show. Where are we going? Take us on a journey, Parker.
Yes. So today I want to talk about a style of cube that I've really been enjoying lately, and that is land-restricted cubes. You might have heard of desert cubes, but I've been designing one for the last 6 to 9 months.
Basically
and
since CubeCon. So
yeah, that
was in October. Yeah, basically 7 months.
It's actually been my main design project, and I feel like I've leveled up a lot as a designer as a part of that process, and so here I am to talk about it and to make you talk about it.
So you were, again, inspired mostly by Bones' Amonkar Desert Cube, right? That was the primary one that inspired you at CubeCon?
Well, let's take a step back from that.
Great. Let's start at the beginning.
Yeah.
Richard Garfield is sitting in the library at University of Pennsylvania.
1993.
You're listening to Linkin Park, and Richard Garfield is...
No, too early for Linkin Park.
No, we don't have to go back that far. We can start in 2022, this summer. I have been just like acquiring almost like pocket lint cards that don't fit in my main cube, which is, a little hostile to maybe synergy cards and things that cost more than 4 mana. But I'm finding these cards that I love. I mean, I'm shuffling them a little now. I'm looking at Priest of Fellrights. Love this card. The Secret Lair version of Cut to Ribbons doesn't really... I mean, I could play it in my main cube, but it would be weak. And this piece of art is just beautiful to me. Has a quote from Milton on it, which I really love. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Anyways, just aesthetically, like these game pieces are really cool, but they did not fit in my main cube. And so I'm just acquiring these because I think they're awesome. And I'm like, I want to play with these.
I feel like a lot of people have this pocket lint in their lives where it's like,
for sure.
I just wish this card, like, for me, it's like, Oswald Fiddlebender is so cool.
Yeah.
My cube is not the home for it, but man, is it cool.
I don't play Commander very much. And so, like, what am I going to do? I'm going to build a cube from it. And what I realized is that, like, the game pieces I was most interested in playing in, sometimes we talk about starting with the cards you love when you build a cube. And I realized that the cards that I loved for this project were not unified by mechanic, but by theme. So the thing that unites Cut to Ribbons and Gala Greeters and Chun-Li Countless Kicks from the Street Fighter Secret Lair, which I loved but did not have a home for, was like, you can kind of sum it up in the pulp fiction aesthetic of Indiana Jones and some like Agatha Christie murder mysteries and, Edgar Allan Poe and that kind of,
that
very
vibe.
pulpy, noir, hard-boiled detective kind of fiction. And when that happened, I was like, okay, this is a starting point for a cube. I can go thematically instead of mechanically. And so I picked the cards that fit this vibe and end up with like a lot more black cards than anything else. Kind of, it makes sense for a noir kind of theme. And
noir means black.
Indeed it does. And that brings us to CubeCon. And I play Austin's Amonkar Desert Cube. I love that experience. And that's where the mechanical influence of this cube comes from. So, in other words, this cube started with theme. And when I realized that I had a bunch of black cards, and I also realized that I loved the decision space enabled by a lands-restricted cube, that's how I ended up with the Pulp Nouveau cube, which is what I call this project. Thank you, John Terrell, for making it cool to have very literary cube names.
Yeah.
And the Pulp Nouveau cube is a cube where the only freely available basic lands are swamps. All the other lands are in the cube, but you must draft them. So yeah, that's the idea of the project.
And we talked about this a little bit on our CubeCon recap episode, but were we on that episode? Now I'm getting confused. Have we talked about this on the show before? The fact, like, why you were so drawn to the mechanical influence of the Desert Cube? Like, what you liked about having to draft your land so much?
Yeah, so I had a really good experience at CubeCon for this cube, and
Did you win a bunch?
I did win this particular cube draft,
Interesting.
which is correlated, I think. But the draft experience was like magical because I was picking lands because I had to, desert cubes, all like Austin's
in the Amonkar
cube.
cube, there are no freely available lands at all.
Exactly. You must draft all of them. And so, I started with Queen Marchesa. And I was like, I wonder if I can make a Mardu mana base work. And I'm picking lands, and because my lands directly restricted what colors I could be, and because my spells directly influenced which colors I wanted to be in, that feedback loop was immensely enjoyable to me. And so I was able to prioritize like 1 mana cyclers for my Korea, for example, modal double-faced cards from Zendikar Rising. So synergy was like directly emergent out of the game pieces that I needed in order to make my mana base work. And that kind of low level...
Every card mattered.
Exactly.
It was like...
Drannith Stinger or whatever, I was using it to fix my mana and to cycle and like find my colored sources, but it also triggered my Ironcrag Pyromancer.
Mm-hmm.
And like that interlocking synergy with the most basic elements of a Magic deck was just awesome to me. And that's what I wanted to pursue mechanically. Because I had this list of thematic cards, it didn't have a mechanical hook or reason for being yet. And Desert Cube provided me with that.
I feel like that's an experience that happens a lot, where there's just sort of this like confluence of multiple ideas that come together, and all of a sudden things that kind of didn't make sense get tied together. And I really love seeing that sort of experience of you have these particular cards you want to play, but they didn't really make sense until you had this, what's the way to, some catalyst to actually just make it make sense and tie everything together.
Or like a Gestalt shift or something, which is what the Pulp Fiction theme did for me. It's like, it's what unified. The other cards I forgot to mention were Lesson Learn, which is actually kind of perfect for like an Indiana Jones, his day job is like archaeologist at a university or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of unifies.
He does some environmental sciences, then he kicks your ass.
Yeah, and it unifies that like Dogged Detective meets environmental sciences in a really elegant way that unifies these things and makes them cohesive where they were once disparate.
I feel like we need a like discrete name for that moment where things come together. You get like the missing piece of the puzzle where you have these ideas floating around in your head and then they coalesce around some last little element. That moment needs a name because I feel like that is how so much of the creative work in my life comes together.
I feel like there must be a very long, very specific German word for this experience.
Germans, write in. Tell us what the long specific word is for the moment where you get the last piece of the puzzle for a creative project and many things come together all at once and you feel inspired.
And if you just make that up, we won't know.
It's true.
Yeah, so that's the basic idea, and I guess I can also talk about some of the design level ups that I've had as part of this experience.
Yeah, I mean, both Anthony and I have played this cube. I think it's good for our listeners to have a baseline. So, swamps are the only freely available basic lands. How many of each other basic land are in the cube?
There are 10 of each other basic land.
Plus a bevy of non-basics.
Yes, I've got, I think, 3 of the Odyssey cycling lands for each color. And that's really important. Like, I've had drafters open up a pack.
Those are the on-color cyclers, right? So
exactly.
They cycle
Lonely
from one...
Sandbar.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I don't remember the... Polluted Mire is the kind that cycles for 2 generic.
Forgotten Cave.
Tranquil Thicket.
Tranquil Thicket.
Some sort of...
The white
step.
one.
Secluded Step.
Secluded Step.
Yeah. I'm glad we got
is bad
that.
radio. We should be trying to name cycles of cards from memory.
First strike to a creature?
No. That is...
Sergi Refuge?
Sajiri Refuge.
That one's a tap land that gains life.
Oh, no.
Sajiri Step. That's the one. That's the one that gives protection, I think.
Protection, not first strike?
I think you enters the battlefield because it used to be a one of.
How much of Magic could we recreate?
Look, ages ago, it used to be a one of in like Legacy Maverick decks with Knight of the Reliquary.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense.
As a like toolbox piece because it enters the battlefield, you submit against protection till end of turn from the color of your choice,
sure.
And so you could use it as a way to fizzle. Removal. Look, this is very boring.
Well,
Please, Parker, save us.
The point is, when people opened Lonely Sandbar in a pack instead of the one that cycled for 2 generic, they were like, "Hey, what's your deal? Like, I can't fix my mana with this. You know, I have to be blue already in order to get the benefit of this land." And I'm kind of like, yeah, that's the whole point. Swamps are freely available. That's kind of the baseline. So level 1 is everybody should be drafting black because it's free, but level 2 is you are incentivized to push out into other colors and like engage with that tension between every off black pick that you make requires you to pick at least one land, if not way more than that. And that's the core tension of the draft. That's where a lot of the fun is, I think, for this particular experience. And so cards like Lonely Sandbar are really bad if you're trying to be multicolor black deck, but really good if you're trying to be blue-green deck splashing black. And that's where I want to be. That also means there's a lot of black X gold cards. So Putrefy or whatever is one of the best removal spells in the format. Unlicensed Disintegration in red-black, Mortify in white-black, Thought Erasure in blue-black, which is not...
I was about to say, what's the blue-black one?
It's not a perfect analogy.
Could go with Agony Warp. That one.
Yeah. I don't know. That one's still in flux, maybe. But, like...
Drown in the Lock.
These pieces are really necessary, and if you want to drastically increase the power of your black picks, you will pick a black X gold card, and that brings you into the tension of the land-restricted draft.
So more basics just of like the landscape of the environment. 10 of each basic land that are not swamps. How many cards are we drafting total? What's the pool size? Because most desert cubes have a larger than 45 card pool because instead of drafting 23 non-land cards plus some non-basic lands, however many you choose, you have to draft all 40 cards. What's the pool size here?
I've done 48. I've done 45. I didn't really perceive a major difference between those. So that's honestly still in flux. This project, I'm happy with many of the contours. That's something I just haven't iterated on enough to like narrow it down.
But because you do have access to basic swamps, you don't feel the need to make it like a noticeably larger pool size because you're not going to end up with like the danger of having a smaller pool size in a real true desert cube where you have no access to any basic lands is that you just don't have 40 playable cards and you can't fill out the rest with basic lands because you didn't have any, so you're just playing cards that are actively like blanks in your deck or just like really awful for your strategy because you need to get to the 40 card minimum.
Right.
What is the like rough breakdown of the black cards in the cube versus the non-black cards? I'm just trying to give the listeners like a basic landscape here.
Yeah, that's a good point. So there are a lot of white, blue, red, and green cards. There's maybe 20 more black cards than there are blue and red. There's maybe 5 to 10 more blue and red cards than there are white and green. So like Selesnya is kind of
that skewed overall.
Exactly. And that's another kind of
there's not going to be 3 mono black drafters at the table.
That's another current in this, kind of like river of a draft experience that pushes you into engaging with the core conceit of a land restricted draft. So in some ways it's like I have this gimmick of like only swamps are freely available, but a lot of the incentives in the draft are still pushing you towards the land restricted, like almost true desert experience.
It's a really interesting draft experience because you can kind of opt into the desert draft or not. You can just choose, I'm going to draft, black or primarily black and just do a normal draft, but then there is that difficult tension of if a lot of people are trying to do that at the table, it's going to be not very successful. You're going to end up stuck on playables. Or I think you've seen some players actually just go in the completely opposite direction and not play any black cards and just go for the full desert experience.
At least one player has done that before.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you've seen more people do it in your local play group.
I have. And that's, something that I want to be possible. The non-black cards are a little more, I think, powerful on average. There are some black cards that are really strong, particularly because they have such low opportunity cost. They don't require you to pick a land along with it. But they also push you towards synergies. And that once, if I have Transmogran's Crown, for example, I can play it in any deck. But if I pick up some red sacrifice pieces or whatever, that'll synergize additionally. Another example would be Scrapwork Mutt. You could play it in a mono black deck.
You're pandering to Anthony now.
I know. Well,
everyone loves Scrapwork Mutt.
Everyone does.
Cube All-Star.
I think it's actually
in
true.
every cube.
I think a lot of people really love that card.
Yeah, it's great. And if you have it in a mono black deck, sure, it plays on the front side, but maybe you pick up that extra mountain in order to splash the Unearth. And that's the kind of crunchy mana-based decisions that I really love. And that's what this format is about in terms of its decision landscape.
Yeah, when I've drafted it, I have definitely felt... I'm not sure if I would describe it the way you described it, but in a normal draft... of non-desert cube, I feel like non-basic lands are kind of in a different category from the rest of the pack, right? You're looking at the pack and you're like, all right, well, here's the best spells in the pack, and then like here are the best non-basic lands. And there's this like separation where then it's like, okay, how much am I going to value a non-basic land at this point in the draft? Like how's my fixing looking? You know, have I gotten some signals of color is open? But you evaluate them kind of on different axes. And then here, I feel that melt away very quickly. It's just like, okay, these cards are all evaluated exactly the same way. It's like, which of these cards is better? I find myself speculating on non-basic lands in this cube way more often than I do in another environment, because it's like, well, I'm going to need lands anyway, so I might as well take this like non-basic that is black and something else, because I can cast my other spells with it, and also it opens me up to way more possibilities as the draft goes on, whereas those different decision matrices becoming the same kind of decision is definitely very interesting. The idea that it's like, oh, I'll just take these non-basic lands, and even if I don't get cards that are on color, I'll probably still end up playing them because you need lands to fill out your deck.
Yeah. Do you also feel that way with like cards like environmental sciences that aren't lands, or like they are spells, but they're primarily meant to fix your mana? Or, you know, Lonely Sandbar would be another example. Do you feel like those kind of bread and butter, fix your mana, avoid mana screw kinds of cards take on a different kind of value here?
You know, maybe I should be evaluating those cards in a traditional cube differently, but I just kind of lump them in with the other spells. Just how good are these spells? How good are they for my deck? I don't lump them in with lands. Maybe I should. I don't know if they take on a different texture. I love environmental sciences, and I love Lesson and Learn here. I think Lesson and Learn is a really cool mechanic for draft specifically.
Yeah.
It's another one of these mechanics. I don't play any constructed, so my opinion on this is completely null and void, but I don't think I like that kind of mechanic in a constructed context where it's just like, okay, now I get to build whatever sideboard I want. But in limited, it's so cool to be able to have this very direct, literal synergy where it's like, okay, well, I have this amazing lesson. Now every single learn card that I see in a pack gets this much better because I know I can go get, what's that 7 mana one?
Mascot Exhibition.
That one, the broken one. Or, you know, one of the other better ones. I think that's just a really cool texture to add to a draft.
I mean, something else that might be worth pointing out that's specifically related to this is that you do also break Singleton, right, for a number of different effects. And I think that Lesson Learn is critical for making Lesson Learn work because it is a more limited card pool because you're only picking from cards that are coming from one set and have this really explicit synergy where you just need those specific cards.
And honestly, like, you know, Lesson Learn could be the companion experience where it's like really depressing to play against Lurrus on turn 3 every single time until the nerf or whatever.
But you still have to draw, you know, a learn card, and you still have to like be in a position where you want to use that learn to get that bomb lesson instead of just get your environmental sciences and fix your mana or whatever.
And so the learn in Strixhaven, I think Wizards did a much better job of like tuning the power level here, where it's not the companion experience, but it still provides those kinds of like, you know, really interesting and fun draft incentives.
I haven't been able to draft the Professor of Symbology deck yet, but I really want to draft that deck in this cube.
Me too.
Yeah, I know you break Singleton for that. How many Professors of Symbologies do you have in the cube?
2 right now.
Okay, just 2.
Which is like twice as many as you could have.
I mean, they're very good cards, I think,
they're
in this context.
extremely good.
Yeah.
And they also serve another purpose, which I really love here, which is like sometimes the looting mode is very real. Not only does it help you fix your mana.
Forgot about that the first time I drafted this cube, and then I was like, wait a minute.
Right. I think it's a rummage, but whatever. Yeah, so it helps you fix your mana. There's a lot of madness cards, which have like... So the Learn was a seed crystal for this format mechanically, along with the desert restriction. And so that means I added some madness cards to synergize with the Learn. I added some light reanimator. Like, I'm not talking actual reanimate, I'm talking zombify, you know, like heavily nerfed. You're not getting Gristlebrand, you're getting Distended Mindbender. And like, you know, you're missing...
That card's cool.
It's very cool, but you're reanimating it as a 5/5, not as a game-winning threat. Anyways, point is...
You're talking like a man that's never been killed by a 5/5 before.
I have been. But like, Learn takes on a lot of additional valence here, which is really novel and interesting, I think.
As somebody who's had my absolute shit kicked in by some of these Street Fighter cards, can we talk about how Street Fighter cards fit the theme of Pulp Nouveau? I'm really interested in this sort of mental gymnastics.
Yeah, so like, it is maybe a little mental gymnastics. I don't play Street Fighter very competitively or at all much, but I like the flavor of the cards.
The cards are cool.
And
They're
they're-
well designed.
In terms of
Well,
Magic,
I don't want to say that. They are compelling top-down designs.
uh-huh. And for Magic, like they are very street level. They, it's not Urza and like godlike planeswalkers with mechs and stuff.
It's just
This
a
is-
strong guy that's good at kicking.
right. and that fits in
Mr.
with
Kicks a lot.
right. Dogged Detective and Gallagreeters and Priest of Fell Rights, just like dudes, who
Okay.
are just people.
So they're similar because they're not gods.
Yeah.
Got it.
And also, like, fighting in a back alley or whatever is kind of noir.
That is true. So the Streets of New Capenna definitely has the like back alley brawler theme going throughout.
Yeah.
You can definitely picture like Jaxus beating up a car until it's broken.
Mm-hmm.
Does that happen in Street Fighter?
Yeah, I was gonna ask if you got that reference.
No.
In Street Fighter, there's bonus stages where like if you're playing the single player campaign mode, whatever they call it. I'm not sure if this is true of modern Street Fighter games, but it definitely was in the old school games. There would be like you get in a couple fights and it'd be like bonus round. Punch this car to pieces, and you'd have like 30 seconds to try and destroy the car as much as possible, and you get bonus points for however much you punch the car.
Yeah. So, that's
Neat.
that's kind of the intersection
Yeah.
for me. These cards are like, they don't have a home anywhere else. So that's part of it. Like,
I'm being a little bit cheeky here. It's
Yeah.
totally fine, obviously, to not be totally adherent to the specific thematic flavor. I think having a cool place to put cards that don't fit other places is the whole point of designing cubes. So
some of
just
them
put a
did
little
get
jaunty
cut.
hat on top of Ken. Give him a little jaunty like newsboy cap, and
Yeah.
then it'll fit better.
I did cut Dalsim.
I'm
and-
sorry, that was my fault probably.
No, it was Dalsim's fault.
Okay.
That card is illegible.
Were you screaming about how a card was illegible, Anthony?
It's
It
very
is.
possible. So I feel like this is
you
an
really popped
interesting-
off last night too with that
interesting
one
trend.
black-white card from whatchamacallit.
Which black-white card was it?
It's from the Neo Commander sets. It's a legendary card that does some nonsense.
No, it's Rhea Ivor Bladehold Lady.
Oh yeah, I really cannot understand that card, but that's fine. That's a me problem. But I think there's something interesting that I've been noticing a lot in card designs. Another one that comes to mind is Oni Called Anvil,
And
where
Unctus.
it has a lot of effects that come together to make one meaningful effect, one sort of specific play pattern, but it is portioned out in ways that it can interact with other effects. So
Yeah.
with Oni Called Anvil, if you sacrifice something not with the Oni Called Anvil, but with something else, it still, does the thing, which is
Which thing does it do
cool.
again? Does
I
it
don't
drain or does it
know.
give you a
I don't
token?
know.
I can never remember.
That's the thing that is. On one hand, I love that aspect of new designs because those are the kinds of things, the kinds of gameplay experiences that I love, where something gets used in ways that are not like exactly the literal one way a card is supposed to work. But it makes it really hard to parse a lot of these cards. And Dalsim, I think, is similar, where it triggers on any of your creatures that have reach, but it also has reach, but allows other things to work with it, and it just
Oh, is it the Big Butts Man? That's Dalsim?
the big butts man. So yeah, I do find that card very difficult to understand, and I had it the
It was
first time
awful.
we played this, and
I-
I apologize for my saltiness.
I watched you, and,
You watched me struggle to try and read a Magic card.
yes, and as the designer, when I wince to see one of my players interacting with a game piece that I chose, that's not a good sign.
Have you
right?
considered finding better players?
No, I want you to enjoy it.
That's a very universal feeling, I think, of wincing when you see players play a card that you put in your cube.
Right.
I still remember specifically when we were playing my cube ages ago with somebody who was newer to Magic and didn't know a lot of old cards, and their opponent played Mother of Runes, and they were like, all right, sure, fine, whatever. Then the next turn, they were like, I'm going to Doomblade it. And they're like, I'll protect it. And they were like, I saw the blood drain out of their face. They were like, oh no, that card is broken.
Yeah.
It can protect itself. That's so dumb. And I was
think-
like, ooh, yeah, that is how that works.
Yeah, winces, they're a piece of strong data for a cube designer in terms of the emotional impact of their game pieces. And I mean, it should be acknowledged, a desert draft, a land-restricted draft like this one, is intentionally and kind of unreasonably difficult.
It's punishing, yeah.
It like on purpose.
Like, I've often heard people describe the flavor of desert cubes as like you are in the desert and you are out of water and
Right.
you are grasping for anything to keep you alive.
And this cube runs 0 deserts. It's a cube of greed and corruption and betrayal, and that's why swamps are freely available. Is like you can access this color of mana easily in this environment, unlike a desert. But the point is, it's supposed to be difficult, and that means as a designer, I'm looking for ways to reduce the complexity burden in other regards. So that's one reason that I think non-singleton works really well here. The second time you see a professor of symbology or the second time you see a learn, having already seen a duplicate of it or whatever, you don't have to read that card again. And that means you can focus on the other parts of the draft, the fun decisions, or the especially hard decisions in this format. I've actually explicitly tried to limit the number of mechanics that don't have reminder text here for a similar reason.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to be thinking really hard about how do I balance my mana base and my spells. I don't want you thinking really hard about, hey, what's the difference between Encore and Unearth? You know, like, that's just not what I'm here for. And Dalsim flunked that test, like, very obviously, and got cut immediately for it.
This is maybe like a weird sidebar, but in this vein, this is something I continue to feel more and more about modern card design, is just, not just that the cards are complicated, fine, whatever, but that many times I feel like the complexity, it is like not worth my mental energy to figure out the complexity. Like, even just last night I was playing a friend of the show, Scott's Cube, and somebody played a Planeswalker against me that I didn't have. I was behind on board, I didn't have Planeswalker removal on my deck, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to read it. Like, I could read it, but I have no way to meaningfully interact with it. I'm just going to let you do whatever you're going to do. But that's a lot of text for me to try and figure out. If I draw a card that can maybe interact with it, then I'll read it perhaps. But it's just like,
it's a long Planeswalker. I'm happy for you, or sorry that happened to you.
I love that meme so much. It doesn't translate so well to audio, but it's a good one.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel this a lot where it's just like I could read it and maybe it would give me a 0.5% better win percentage, but Magic is a game of making those decisions and deciding what to focus your energy on. Because if I spend my time doing that and not thinking about, I don't know, the complexity on board or what my attacks are or what my outs are, then I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is relevant, and that is part of the fun part of the game, is figuring out where to focus your energy and how to, like, most meaningfully triage where to put that effort. But it is very different to me when you're thinking about how far through the next couple turns do I want to think, like, how much can I evaluate these sort of strategic complexities versus how much do I actually literally just want to read that card.
Yeah.
It is a meaningfully different experience when it is just the surface level that you're triaging away, and I don't really love that personally.
For me, my mantra with this cube has been familiarity lowers complexity. And the draft experience is very unfamiliar, just inherently. Nobody...
You don't unpack slot and see 3 basic lands.
Exactly.
And consider taking them.
Exactly.
Very early.
Anybody who's played Retail Limited has some of their experience that they need for this, but not all of it. And that's just the baseline. And therefore, I want the rest of the cube to be familiar. The cards are also not familiar in and of themselves, like the Street Fighter cards. Lesson learned, if you played Strixhaven, you know them, but it's not like they're seeing Modern play all over the place. And so, again, singleton breaking, limiting the number of mechanics. These have been almost liberating as a designer because it lets me have some clear guidelines, and it makes me okay with abandoning a card like Dalsim because it's complex and it's not worth the logistics of reading that thing.
Every card is that decision, right?
Yeah.
Like, we all have cards in our cube that are the most complicated card in our cube, and we'd probably like it to be simpler, but also we all decided that that complexity was worth the gameplay experience, what it added to the depth of decks or the types of drafts or games you could have. That's all the decisions, so makes sense.
So I wonder, like, the last kind of major design level up that I've had. Anthony's talked a lot about this Patrick Chapin article on investment.
Which you introduced me to, so thank you for that.
And somebody else introduced, I think somebody in the Riptide Lab community put me onto it in the first place. So, you know, it's been circulating. But it's this really wonderful idea. Patrick is writing this in Kaladesh Standard, and he's saying, like, part of the reason the deck building and metagame was, like, less satisfying in that era is because the threats didn't require investment. Threats like the Scarab God, you know, which even if it can be killed, comes back or whatever. So, for example, let me find a good card here. Chun-Li, Countless Kicks, 3 mana Baneslayer, right? And you can pay more mana into it and you can recoup that card advantage later. But still dies very easily to removal, has to enter the combat step. All the Street Fighter cards have to enter the combat step in order to gain value. And that poses risk, right? Because if your opponent can have a combat trick or, like, surprise death touch or whatever, that is a risk. And Patrick's point with investment is, if you have to invest in these cards, that opens up strategic counterplay, not just counterplay of, do I have the right kill spell or not? And that leads to kind of a dynamic metagame that's it resists solution and leads to a more repeatable experience.
What do you mean by strategic counterplay there? Like, why does cards that require investment specifically open up strategic counterplay more than...
So, Scarab God, let's say you play game 1, you know your opponent has that, or like it's constructed and they have 4 copies. It's like, okay, do I race the Scarab God? It's going to be hard to do that by turn 5. Can I outcard the Scarab God? Not really, because it comes down, steals my creatures from my graveyard, punishes me for playing cool creatures and trying to race, and also gains life every turn. Like, there's just no strategic counterplay. You can't kill it, really.
Why did standard players at that time not simply play Swords to Plowshares?
Good question. So, like, that's kind of a lack of strategic counterplay.
I would simply have played Swords to Plowshares, personally. That's my strategy.
Big mistake. I guess they don't know how to use Scryfall.
Whereas with Chun-Li, there are ways to deal with it. Like, a little bit of grave hate here and there can restrict the value that she gets. If you just have a 4/4, that's going to make it hard for the opponent to attack and gain value off their Chun-Li, right? These are a much broader class of answers than the ones that were available for the Scarab God. And they're answers that are less dependent on the quality of cards in your opponent's deck and more like how they choose to use their game pieces.
So it's kind of like the flip side of the perhaps degenerative game pattern we've observed sometimes, which is that cubes that play a lot of synergy, that try to be synergy cubes, but also play a ton of removal, all the synergy just becomes a trap, because it's like, okay, well, this card does not work unless I have something else going on, and so if there's a lot of ways to strategically interact with that other thing going on, then maybe I just never get to do it.
Right.
If you strike that balance, though, then you do have this like window where the interaction is interesting, dynamic, you have some interaction, but you have to choose when to use it as opposed to just having enough to use it all the time on everything.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, like, because synergy pieces are inherently more fragile because they require something else, that opens up more ways to interact with it.
It means that the history of your game pieces matters, like how you used your game pieces in the turns leading up to it matters, and game decisions are less invalidated by power outliers. That does require a fragility and like respecting the fragility of these game pieces. So this cube is not full of doom blades and like cut down and really efficient removal. There's always a danger to using quasi-analytical, like you don't want the metric to become the thing that you seek instead of good gameplay. If you're using a metric to quantify your gameplay, don't chase the metric, chase the gameplay. And it's easy to confuse those things. Even so, I've like laid out the interaction in this cube, and I've laid out my threats, and I say, I want Chun-Li to be viable. I want Gallagreeters to be strong but not overbearing. I want a reanimated Eldrazi on turn 4 to be answerable, but not trivially answerable and not for a massive tempo advantage, right?
No Swords to Plowshares on your zombified, distended Mindbender.
None of that here. And
that was quite a sentence.
Yeah. And so where I ended up is like matching the removal such that it can remove threats that cost about 1 more mana than it. So, 2 mana removal can answer 3 mana threats pretty cleanly. Can answer 2 mana threats with maybe some card advantage attached, or like, a little bit of bonus, like Surveil 2 or whatever. But eventually, the threats can't be answered at a huge benefit using removal. Yeah, I've just tried to carefully tune that trade-off. I think the best removal spell in the format is either Mortify type of removal if you're in multicolor, or Price of Fame.
I was going to say Price of Fame. It's felt really good here.
It's very good, but it's not all about the rate of the card. Sometimes you care about the Surveil, right? Sometimes you want to put...
I mean, it's felt good because it is in mono black, so you're going to be able to cast it relative to these other gold removal spells we've mentioned. And because I have noticed that a decent number of the cards I really want to remove are legendary. It's just like the power outliers tend to be legendary, and so that little bonus of having to only pay 2 instead of 4, and the Surveil is always relevant. Yeah, I think that card really fits nicely here.
It's great, and I run like 4 of them or something for that reason. Again, because like I'm trying to lower the complexity here. Yeah, so these different level ups of like explicitly choosing the removal in order to make the threats that I like thrive in this environment. That's been a really big level up for me. And the second is lowering the complexity in as many ways as I can to alleviate the novel and harsh draft experience and kind of highlight that and not overwhelm people because of it. Yeah, so those are the design level ups I wanted to share. Start with the cards you love. Familiarity lowers complexity, and choosing threats that have investment, and then making sure that investment isn't like totally punished. That's been really key for me in making this format feel enjoyable and like really refreshing and a fun design challenge.
Not to put you on the spot, but do you have like a handful or one or two examples of these threats that require investment that you can give?
Yes.
Just to make sure that the idea has been effectively communicated. Like, what is a threat that requires investment here that checks all those boxes for you?
So, one threat is Growth Chamber Guardian. This is a 2-mana 2/2 from Guilds of Ravnica. Andy's drafted it to great effect. It has an adapt ability, and when you adapt it, it becomes a 4/4, and you can also search for an additional copy. So I run 3 of them. Now, this requires a lot of investment. Not only is it green, so you have to draft basic lands, probably, somewhere north of 8 green sources in order to cast this thing on turn 2. Not only that, you have to draft additional copies, and you have to spend 3 mana that could be responded to with a shock or whatever. So you're committing 5 mana total, but what you get out is a 4/4, a second copy, maybe a third copy if you have it in your deck. So there's obviously a huge payout here, but the drafter has to invest in that during the draft phase to a non-negligible extent, and also in gameplay. There's counterplay. The opponent can hold up shock on turn 3 if they see.
Well, you still get to get the thing if they shock it in response to adapting it, though.
Yeah, I think so. But that's still counterplay. Like, they don't have a 4/4.
Sure. Yeah, I think that one is a great example of investment in the draft.
Right.
The gameplay, I'm not as much convinced, just because it just feels super powerful to get to play it on turn 2 and then turn 3, draw a card and attack with a 4/4. And obviously, to some degree, you could argue any creature that doesn't have indestructible or hexproof has counterplay in the sense that it could be removed.
Right.
So,
and the greater point is the drafter earned it. They spent 10 picks to make that happen with the lands and with the additional copies of Growth Chamber Guardian.
How much of that is specific to the fact that this is an environment where you can't just put forests in your deck? Like, if you're talking about a regular cube, do you still consider Growth Chamber Guardian a high investment card?
Maybe not. And so it is a little bit peculiar to this context, but let's also talk about Distended Mindbender. We've mentioned this before. It's, I think, an 8-mana Eldrazi, but it also has a merge, so you can discount it by sacrificing a creature. That's investment. You've committed a whole card to the discount, and sure, you get a nice cast trigger from the Eldrazi, but it's like a 3 for 2. You get to Thoughtseize 2 cards from their hand, kind of.
Yeah, one cheap card, one expensive card.
Yeah, I'm not going to read this whole rules text. But 2 cards from their hand, a body, a 5/5, and you paid the Mindbender and a card that you emerged.
And the mana for both of them.
And the mana. So that's investment, again. Or you can maybe zombify it from your graveyard. If you just want the 5/5 for 4 mana.
Maybe you discarded it earlier to
to
pay some cost for an effect that you wanted. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Or you just hard cast it for 8, and then you've invested in being a control deck, and you're vulnerable to being raced, and you're vulnerable to being out-tempoed. Somebody bounces the Eldrazi and you've lost all your value. Or, you've lost a lot of tempo. So this is another example, I think, of investment. It's not going to guaranteed lock up the game for you. It's dynamic depending on the cards that you've played already, the cards that your opponent has played. A counterexample, Evelyn the Covetous, it has a ridiculous mana cost of 2 generic, a hybrid
one of those
Rakdos,
ones.
A black mana, and a hybrid Dimir mana. And then it's a 2/5 flash that kind of does a Gonti thing where it steals up cards from your opponent's library. This is a very, at first I thought, oh, maybe this is high investment. It's hard to cast or whatever. And it turns out that's very far from the actual play pattern. It's really mono black with 3 different buyout clauses, depending on how you want to pay your mana, which is very low investment. It has flash, which means it's less vulnerable to removal. You can time the window so that you get most value from your 2/5. It's a 2/5, so it blocks like a champ and gives you the buffer of your, it stabilizes the battlefield so well that you can actually use the cards from the ETB. So it just synergizes in this way that it's just a 5-mana bomb that doesn't require investment. So that's a card that I had in here initially and cut because it wasn't providing this investment. Anthony, do you have some more cards to mention?
Yeah, I mean, I just pulled out a couple going through the list. You mentioned the Distended Mindbender, and you do have a bunch of these Emerge cards. You've also got this Mockery
The
of
Emerge
Nature.
cards are so
which,
cool.
I mean, this is just
Yeah.
a very literal expression of that requiring investment because you're spending 2 cards and a bunch of mana. You are managing to get it out a little bit more efficiently because, or at least faster, by spending that mana across multiple cards. But you're spending a lot of resources to get these cards in play. So that's a very literal form of that investment.
Just to be clear then, so like by this definition, reanimating Grizzlebrand is a very high investment play line, right? Because you're investing
Yeah.
a bunch of cards to get a creature into play.
In some
You
ways.
had to draft a very narrow set of cards that interact in very specific ways and are not good generically in order to make it happen.
Yeah, but Grizzlebrand also really insulates you from risk after all this happens
Mhm.
because you can always just draw 7 cards. Like, there's a little bit of risk there if he gets killed and you've paid 7 life and now you're maybe going to die on the next attack step or whatever, but like, that's a lot less risk than reanimating Distended Mindbender, which doesn't have snowballing value outside of the 5/5 body.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason if you can reanimate Grizzlebrand, you want to do that over just a generic huge body.
Exactly.
Another one that I think is also just very literal is Hollow One. So this is 5 mana for a 4/4. It's got cycling 2, and it also costs 2 less for each other card you've discarded this turn, which I think there is a fair amount of like madness and discard synergy, and this is just a really efficient way to get out a cheap body, but it does take that investment of building your deck around it, and also potentially, sequencing around it and setting up that turn where you can actually do multiple cycles in order to get it out there.
Sorry, what is the relationship here between risk and investment? Because
They kind of scale the same way,
Because
right?
like a Hollow One to me feels like an extremely low risk card. I can always just cycle it. It's a colorless card. I can play it in any deck. The baseline in this environment of a 5 mana 4/4 is fine. We talked about zombifying a 5/5, so just paying 5 mana for a 4/4 is fine. I guess I'm still struggling to understand.
I mean, the investment is a 5 mana 4/4 is potentially just not that good. It's not enough to be a card in your deck. So you really need to maximize it. You need to either have something else that the cycling is contributing to, because also just cycling
It's also a
card for
2 mana
2 mana.
cycler. We're talking about playing Draenei Stinger to fix your mana here. I mean,
Okay,
is it
No,
really?
we're talking about Lonely Sandbar, which is here in like 3 copies of each of them, right? And so I think
Right, Amakarb was Draenei Stinger.
Yeah,
Sorry,
Hollow
I
One
got
is very
confused.
much below rate in terms of just pure mana fixing.
Mhm.
Like, you could also play Environmental Sciences or Scrapwork Mutt, and you get the same cycle effect, but with a lot higher floor. So Hollow One, its floor is actually lower than you think, I think.
Okay, let me try one more on you. Kessig Cagebreakers. This is 5 mana for a 3/4. Not exactly where you want to be with your normal
And also
creatures.
green, right?
And it's green, so you've got to be able to draft a forest or whatever. And when it attacks, put a 2/2 green wolf token into the battlefield, tapped and attacking for each creature card in your graveyard.
Yeah.
This just takes a lot of investment because you both need to be able to cast it. You need to be able to attack after casting a 5/5, and you might just be losing your 3/4 to a Hollow One. And you also need to fill up your graveyard with a bunch of creatures to really maximize that. Does this sound like a high investment card to you?
That one seems very unambiguously
All right,
high
I should have started
investment.
with that one.
I'm not at all trying to like roast your picks of high investment cards. I'm still just trying to like, I guess the way you're describing some of these cards as being investment is like, I had to invest in playing a 5-drop. It's like, do you? Like, I don't know.
I mean,
like, I think you could use some similar arguments to describe almost any card as high investment, right? Where it's like, is Grim Lavamancer high investment? I had to play a creature that could have been removed before I untapped, and I had to put things in my graveyard. But I don't think it's a high investment card in most environments. It's just a very good base rate. If they remove your 1/1, who cares? It's a 1/1 because you paid only 1 mana for it. Playing a 1 mana card that forces removal seems fine. It just seems like the justifications for some cards being high investment could be used to describe a lot of different cards. I'm just trying to get at. I think I know intuitively what's a high investment card. I've been experimenting with more of these in my own cube. Like, I just added Emery to my own cube, which I think is a textbook high investment card, right? Like, it's just a N mana, a 1/2 or 3 mana 1/2 that doesn't do anything unless you untap with it and also have some artifact in your graveyard, which is asking a lot. And then the ceiling is really high because if you get to just loop some powerful artifact over and over again, that's kind of busted.
Yeah.
But it does require a lot of investment.
Let me try out something on you. One way to think about investment that I've been wondering about recently is an idea described by Patrick Sullivan in one of his recurring insights videos. He talks about Goblin Guide and how Goblin Guide's drawback is not really a drawback because the 1 mana 2/2 haste is just so efficient that you kill your opponent before the drawback matters. And so he talks about how like all of the characteristics of Goblin Guide all point towards the same strategy of kill the opponent as soon as possible.
Yeah.
A card like Chun-Li, Kessig Cagebreakers, to some extent Hollow One in a format that isn't like all in on Faithless Looting or whatever. These cards, their characteristics require different currencies of input. Like Chun-Li requires mana, requires instants in your graveyard, even though she's a creature who wants to attack. Kessig Cagebreakers requires creature cards in your graveyard, which is a different currency than it requires to be an effective game piece.
So the suggestion is that Goblin Guide is a low investment creature.
Yeah.
That strikes me as a very high investment
Yeah,
creature.
I sort of agree with that.
Like, you need to have a whole deck dedicated to killing your opponent quickly, otherwise it's actively kind of bad. You don't just put Goblin Guide in a, like, high-curving, blue-red deck. You need to invest your entire draft around a strategy to support that card. Otherwise, the downside is really significant. The downside can be really bad.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky, and I'm not, like...
And in that case, like, I don't know. I think some of these... we shouldn't say the words. The M and the B words. I feel like...
Oh, no, definitely not.
I feel like we're on that spectrum, but we shouldn't say the M and the B words. I feel like in some cases, right, like, Kessig Cagebreakers has a better floor than Goblin Guide. Like, you just... A 3/4 is better than a 2/2 that is bad to attack with if you draw it on turn 5 or whatever.
But the difference is Goblin Guide... its power is pointed in a single direction such that it collapses draft and deck building decisions.
So we're talking about like linearity versus
in some
flexibility
ways it's
now.
linearity.
Yeah,
right?
because I would definitely agree that Goblin Guide is one of the most linear aggro
Exactly.
cards that's ever been printed.
Exactly. And a card like Chun-Li is very not linear. The instants that you pair with it are open-ended.
Yeah.
The fact that you like have to pay more mana into it to get more value, and then you have to cast the instance as she attacks. It's just...
So this seems like a very different axis now, right? Because, like,
Yeah.
Shieldred is the least linear card I can think of, and that's not investment at all. I just cast it and I win if you can't remove it, because it doesn't really matter what our decks are doing, because it's just really broken.
Yeah.
I think this is all very interesting and relevant. I think there's a lot of very related ideas, right? I think this idea of M versus B, and I'm not saying the words, is like one concept. This idea of investment in draft versus investment in gameplay, right? Like Goblin Guide, no investment in gameplay, right? If you drafted it correctly, then you just play the card, you attack with it. It doesn't really have any investment in the gameplay side, but it does have a lot of investment on the draft side, because you can't just jam it in any deck. You have to be a deck you have to be in a linear deck, right? Which is the same kind of linear deck you need to be in to make Grizzlebrand good. Like, Reanimator is a very linear strategy because the cards are very narrow and only do the one thing, but we also agreed that reanimating something was a somewhat high investment play. So I think it's like a couple of different axes here, and I don't hear this axis of investment talked about a lot. I hear Flare. I hear sometimes the axis of linear versus non-linear,
modular,
whatever the opposite of non-linear is. But the idea of investment, I think, is a different one. I guess I would maybe distinguish draft investment versus gameplay investment,
for sure,
and investment of other types of mechanics versus just investment of mana. Like the idea, I don't know, I was reminded when you said earlier, you said some card was like an investment because it was just 5 mana, and that was always an investment to cast a 5 mana card. I reminded of the time we had Justin on, and he talked about how by invitation only was, not a free roll because it's a 5 mana card and you can't just put a 5 mana card in your deck. And I still don't know if I totally agree with that. Like the idea that this Wrath can just be played by an aggro deck. The reason it's good is because you will put it in your aggro deck. So it is kind of a free roll.
Yeah. So I think the key point here for this cube is that 5 mana cards are not a free roll in my main or higher power cube.
Right. They're actively kind of awful or traps there. Like, I think a new player might be trapped by thinking this 5-drop is really powerful, I'm going to take it. And then,
in reality, you should play 1 max.
Yeah.
2 max. So this cube is meant to make those cards thrive and the gameplay revolve around them. And that requires me to, as imperfectly as I'm doing it right now, and as, like, English is failing me to, maybe we should be speaking German so that we would have a word for exactly what we're talking about here. But
we're allowed to do this in English as well.
Yeah.
Do it right now. Make up a word. You won't.
You're on the spot.
Oh, no.
Invent a new term.
Invent a word.
Oh no, I can't do it.
Grumsplum.
I reject this challenge.
Grumsplum? Grumsplum is what you came up with.
Well, regardless of the word we choose, this concept of investment is like my North Star in terms of choosing cards that I want to thrive here, and in terms of cutting the cards that choke those cards out.
Here's the other thing I was thinking, which I think is maybe somewhat obvious to people, but it bears saying. Chapin's article, I believe, was entirely about constructed.
Yeah.
And in draft, there is investment in every single card because you had to spend a draft pick on it.
Yeah.
And that's very different in constructed, where you just get to put all the best cards in your deck. And so this problem of the cards being just generically good, not requiring you to take any risk in deck building, not rewarding you for taking any risk in deck building, I think that is much more pronounced in a constructed format where you can just jam your deck full of the best cards and not have to worry about it. Whereas here, we talked about, even taking a Goblin Guide or taking a, 5-mana card, like that is in some ways an investment because it's draft,
Right.
but it's an investment that every single draft pick is, right? Like you could also take you could take Lightning Bolt and red could be not open. Like, so you still invested something in picking the most generically good card that's playable in every single format since the beginning of time. And honestly, it's part of what I really love about draft, right? Is that there is investment in everything you're doing.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about this cube? Was it fun for you to draft?
I would like to draft this cube a bunch more because I find it to be extremely, extremely challenging, and I just don't really have a good sense in how to navigate it. Even just like the basic decisions of, is a black X colored dual land better than two other colors? I really don't have a good sense of that.
Right. Do you want Golgari Rot Farm or Steam Vents?
Right.
Good question. Yeah, I'm interested to play this more again, too. The last time I played, and you have more experience than we do playing this, but the last time we played, Parnell, again, ran the table. He tends to do that a lot. Parnell ran the table with just a 5-color deck, and I wondered how you've considered... I think the answer is probably the same investment and build around. That's the other sort of axis. We haven't used the build around word, but that's, I think, a lot of what we're talking about with investment here.
Similar to it, yeah.
But the other question was going to be like, his mantra was just take all the fixing and then take all the good cards that come back around, which some people do in every cube, right? I think Zolthix has said before, like, take every fixing land, take every gold card that wheels, and in most cubes you'll like have a pretty good deck, because most cube designers have not gone out of their way to consider how to balance this type of deck. I think you maybe in this sort of structure have the risk of that being even more true, right? Because non-basic lands are an even higher pick because you need to draft most of your lands anyway. So if you're additionally rewarded for taking completely speculative dual lands, and then you're more likely maybe even to wheel gold cards that are power outliers because players just are less likely to be able to cast them. I don't know. I have no idea if that is going to be like a dominant strategy, but it worked out really well for Justin, and I'm curious to maybe try something similar in the next draft I do of just prioritize lands over even like very good black spells, which I think the first couple of times I've drafted this, it was like, all right, well, if there's a really good black card, I'm just taking it because I can for sure cast it, and like the investment is low there, right? I just take the good black card, I can cast it. Whereas I think Parnell's attitude was like, just aim higher, right?
Yeah, and I think that will evolve as I kind of hone in on the scarcity of the format. Like, what's the right razor's edge to walk between train wrecking people's drafts or giving them too many tools and making it too easy and like kind of removing the whole point of the land restricted draft. That will evolve. And also I think a metagame can emerge. Like if we played this cube with the same group a second time, all knowing that Parnell destroyed us with this 5-color thing, maybe we're all going to draft lands higher.
And if you all do that, then nobody can do that thing. Yeah,
exactly.
And that's what I mean is like, I'm curious to try that because I want to be on Parnell's side and feel what it's like to have my picks recontextualized by knowing my strategy is to try and draft a more soupy deck. Maybe even part of that is just capitalizing on the fact that everyone's mana is worse. Yeah, your deck is maybe it's a little less true here, but I think in general in Desert Cubes people have to reset themselves on just like, oh, my deck's going to be worse, right? Like, and one thing I actually really like about these kind of cubes is making basic lands a high pick. It's like, ooh, untapped red sources? Like, that's fantastic here. I love having an untapped red source.
Yeah, I mean...
I think it's a really cool cube.
Thanks.
And I am excited to play it again sometime.
Awesome.
I love when a cube is new and you get to, like, do a draft, have a thesis, and then apply that to the next draft, and then, like, have a new thesis, and just, like, continue to try and, like... I like when when you're learning in big leaps in the early days of a cube's lifespan. Whereas once you've had a cube for a long, long time and you haven't made big like sweeping changes to it, it's more like small, iterative changes as opposed to big leaps.
And there's a lot of big leaps to be made when you're drafting your basics for the first time. It's
Very
a fun.
true.
It's like my favorite part about this cube is seeing drafters' eyes light up when I say they only get one basic land for free. Everybody kind of perks up, and that's, I think,
Sort of like the opposite of a wince.
in the right group. That's just really special. Yeah.
All right, I got a pack here. We've been shuffling piles of this cube for a little bit. I'm not exactly sure how shuffled this is. We only have one land, but it's a pack. We're going to do it. Packs are random. That's how it works.
Yeah.
I'm going to read the pack, and I'm going to pass it around the table so that Parker and Anthony can tell us what they're taking. The pack is Rafine's Informant, Masked Bandits, Falconwrath Gorger, Magmatic Channeler, Call of the Herd, Curator of Mysteries, Inspiring Overseer, Toulouse Clever Conductor, Plains, Shattered Seraph, Ogre Slumlord, Braids Cabal Minion, Skursdag High Priest, Giada Font of Hope, and Dovin Grand Arbiter.
So, as
Are
I
there a
said,
lot of appealing options in this pack? A lot of things jumping out at you,
we
perhaps?
got a plains, we got a planeswalker, we got all kinds of options. Again, like I said, really don't know how to approach this cube. The things that stand out to me are there are some very powerful black cards, and I personally just think Ogre Slumlord is a very cool card.
Oh yeah.
Would you call it a high investment card?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I need game pieces to die in order
Just
to trigger
asking.
it. Yeah.
We've also got Braids and Skursdag High Priest. I mean, this is all sounding like a package of stuff I want to draft together. I think of these black cards, Skursdag High Priest is actually the one I'm most excited about because the ceiling is really high and it is low investment in terms of mana cost.
Here's what the rule stacks of Skursdag High Priest.
All right, so this is 1 and a black for a 1/2 human cleric. It has Morbid, tap 2 untapped creatures you control, put a 5/5 black demon creature token with flying into the battlefield, but of course you can only do that if a creature died this turn. That takes a lot of investment, but I feel like that's not too hard to make work, and if you're making a 5/5 every turn, you're in great shape. I feel like the non-black card that stands out to me is Call the Herd, just a lot of value, very solid, only one colored mana pip that is not black. We also do have 2 of these Streets of New Capenna mana-fixing creatures, which, you know, if I'm playing swamps, these let me play other colors, but I think I'm still not high on those enough to push me off of.
Not pick one.
I kept getting those really late in drafts of this
Yeah.
cube, and I think they're better than people give them credit for. I was getting
Yeah.
them like, wheeling them all the time and getting them 10th and 11th pick and stuff.
Yeah.
But I've not started them for sure.
So I think I'm going to start with this Skursdag High Priest. How about you guys?
I am just going to take Magmatic Channeler out of that pack. I think there is enough discard and graveyard stuff going on that Channeler is going to be a high pick. I also like being able to cycle through bad cards in my hand, cards that I can't cast, because if my deck is a little bit less consistent, then I think having ways to rummage is good, as evidenced by all the discussion about learn earlier and whatnot, and also exiling 2 is better than just drawing 1, so you get to get whatever you need. I don't think any of the picks in this pack are like great. We're not like, we didn't open a bomb, we didn't open like a clear giant power outlier, and I like starting on a 2-mana card that I think synergizes well with the environment and gives me a discard outlet and pays me off for discarding.
I'm a little bit with you. I think Channeler is, in this context, extremely high floor. Like, it's easily castable. You can cast it through a little bit of Mana Screw, and it will help you solve the rest of your Mana Screw or Mana Flood, right? And that's kind of hard to overstate in a format where your lands aren't entirely in your control.
Yeah, I like that even if I, get my red mana from a treasure token, or I filter it off of a chromatic star or something, once this is in play, this will hopefully make the rest of my deck tick as I discard the stuff that I can't cast to exile cards to help me cast the other cards in my hand.
Right. And I also love, Anthony, you were speculating on Call of the Herd, and I love like the Basking Rootwalla, Noose Constrictor, Madness Aggro green deck. I think it's really fun to pilot, and it was one of the kind of mechanical seed crystals of this cube as well. So those are really good. I'm actually going to go with Giada, Font of Hope.
Going hard on the angel build around.
Oh, yeah. And partly that's because I think Shattered Seraph might wheel.
I think it will.
I think Inspiring Overseer might even wheel. It was like, crazy in Streets of New Capenna, but here its power is attenuated a little bit. And there's also some Black Angels I think Cleaving Reaper is a 5-mana Angel Berserker. Anyways, point is, I think
You're
I can
committing
be
to the highest investment card, perhaps, without
White
the
Black
highest
Angels,
payoff.
and I think it's really cool. Like I'm here for the coolness, partly.
Yeah,
I mean, although 2-mana 2/2 Flying Vigilance, the floor is pretty high there.
Yeah,
it's true.
I have outs to be white aggro as well, and that lets me do the Professor of Symbology thing. And
I would have
love that
taken
as
Professor of Symbology out of this pack easy.
Oh, yeah.
I really want to draft that deck.
Mm-hmm. I mean, how close is Rafine's Informant?
I mean,
Smart.
it's similar mechanically, but
Yeah.
it is not anywhere near as cool. The reason I want the Professor of Symbology deck is specifically to build a little lesson package.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dovin could wheel. I think Talyus could wheel. Inspiring Overseer could wheel. And I would happily put any of those into my final deck. So I think that's why I'm on Giada for now. Like,
I would take the Magmatic Channeler, hope to wheel Call of the Herd, but then Anthony would take it a couple seats away.
Yeah.
It's true, I would.
all right.
All right, we're all starting on 2-mana spells.
And Justin's going to go 3-0.
Yeah, well, you know.
All right, so we solved it. Great.
Parker, thanks for coming on the show and solving my mana screw problem of my podcast screw problem of needing to get a podcast out this week.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Thank you for shuffling my entire cube.
Yeah, we did. We shuffled it, and now we're going to go play more Magic. We have another rotisserie draft to do today. We just can't be stopped.
It's been a big cube weekend.
You said that with a maybe not the most happy face on. Are you
I mean,
tired?
I'm a little tired. I'm doing at least 3 cubes this weekend, and also I watched Cube and Hypercube.
And also, you
which-
hosted yesterday and cooked a beautiful meal for everybody. So
I'm pretty happy with that dinner. I hope
it
people liked
was
it.
it was really good.
delicious.
It was
Thank you.
next level stuff. And on that bombshell, that brings us to the end of this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. All of our music is produced by DJ James Nasty. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. This show is produced by Parker LaMascus, thinking really hard about Magic cards and then speaking into a microphone about it.
Yes.
Thanks again, Parker.
Thank you for coming here with me.
To my home?
Yes.
Thank you for
meeting
coming
me.
to your own home.